You're standing in the marble halls of ancient Rome, surrounded by the most powerful men in history, when suddenly you witness something that makes your stomach turn. A young boy, barely 14, is being dragged through corridors lined with gold and silk, his fate already sealed by men who see him not as a human being, but as an object to be molded, broken, and used for their darkest desires. What you're about to discover isn't just another tale of Roman excess, it's the horrifying reality of how absolute power transforms innocent children into living nightmares, trapped in a world where their bodies, minds, and souls belong entirely to their masters. Before we dive into these forgotten stories that history tried to bury, if you're fascinated by the dark truths hidden in ancient civilizations, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content that uncovers what really happened behind closed doors in the ancient world. And please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these disturbing chapters of human history together, connected across continents by our shared need to understand how far humanity can fall when power goes unchecked. The name you're about to hear might not be familiar, but the nightmare he lived through will haunt you long after this video ends. This isn't just about one boy's suffering, it's about a system so twisted, so deliberately cruel that it turned children into commodities and called it culture. What happened to these young victims represents one of the most systematic forms of abuse in recorded history, and yet most people have never heard their stories. Let me start by painting a picture of Rome that your history textbooks probably never showed you. While poets wrote about glory and conquest, while architects built monuments that still inspire awe today, a shadow economy flourished in the private chambers of the wealthy and powerful. This wasn't the Rome of noble senators debating philosophy. This was the Rome where money could buy anything, including human souls. The practice began innocently enough, or so the Romans told themselves. Wealthy families would purchase young slaves, often boys between the ages of 10 and 15, ostensibly to serve as household attendants. These children came from conquered territories, their families either dead or sold into different forms of bondage. They arrived in Roman homes already broken by trauma, separated from everything they'd ever known, speaking languages their new masters couldn't understand. But these weren't ordinary servants. The selection process was meticulous and disturbing. Roman buyers would examine these children like livestock, looking for specific physical characteristics that met their twisted preferences. They wanted boys who appeared delicate, whose features could be considered beautiful by Roman standards, whose voices hadn't yet changed with adolescence. The prettier the child, the higher the price, because these buyers knew exactly what they were purchasing. Once acquired, these boys entered a world designed to strip away every trace of their original identity. Their names were changed to Roman ones, often reflecting their new role or their master's preferences. Their native clothes were burned and replaced with silk tunics that emphasized their youth and vulnerability. Their hair was styled in fashions popular among Roman women, and they were taught to walk, sit, and speak in ways that pleased their owners. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was psychological warfare designed to break these children's spirits completely. They were isolated from other slaves who might show them kindness or help them remember their origins. Instead, they were surrounded by adults whose entire job was to remake them according to their master's desires. Every aspect of their daily existence was controlled, from what they ate to how they stood, from the expressions on their faces to the tone of their voices. The training these boys received was both comprehensive and horrifying. They learned to read their master's moods, to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to become whatever fantasy he wanted them to embody on any given day. They studied literature and music not for their own enrichment, but so they could entertain their owners more effectively. They learned to apply cosmetics, to style their hair in elaborate fashions, and to move with a grace that emphasized their artificial femininity. But perhaps most disturbing was how they were taught to respond to abuse as if it were affection. Roman masters didn't want their boy concubines to resist or show fear. They wanted them to appear willing, even grateful, for whatever attention they received. These children learned to smile through pain, to express joy when they felt terror, to perform love when they experienced only violation. The psychological conditioning was so complete that many of these boys genuinely began to believe that their suffering was normal, even desirable. The daily reality of their existence defies comprehension. They slept in chambers adjacent to their master's bedroom, available at any hour for whatever purpose he desired. They accompanied him to social gatherings where other wealthy Romans would admire his acquisition and discuss the boy's attributes as if he were a piece of art or a prized horse. They were displayed, touched, and evaluated by strangers who saw nothing wrong with treating a human child as entertainment. During these social events, the boys were expected to perform, singing, dancing, reciting poetry, or simply standing silently while adults discussed their physical characteristics. They learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when they should be charming, when they should be submissive, when they should disappear entirely. Their survival depended on becoming expert interpreters of adult moods and desires, developing an almost supernatural ability to anticipate what would please or anger the people who controlled their fate. The Roman legal system offered these children no protection whatsoever. They were classified as property, not people, which meant their masters could do anything to them without fear of legal consequences. They could be beaten, starved, tortured, or killed on a whim, and Roman law would treat it the same as breaking a piece of pottery. This legal framework wasn't an oversight. It was deliberately designed to give wealthy Romans unlimited power over the most vulnerable members of society. What makes this system even more horrifying is how normalized it became in Roman culture. Owning beautiful boy slaves was seen as a mark of sophistication and wealth, something to be proud of rather than ashamed. Roman poets wrote verses celebrating these relationships, artists created sculptures depicting them, and philosophers discussed them as if they were perfectly natural arrangements. The abuse of children had become so integrated into Roman society that it was essentially invisible to the people perpetrating it. The psychological damage inflicted on these boys extended far beyond their years of servitude. Those who survived to adulthood often struggled with profound identity confusion, having spent their formative years being forced to become someone else entirely. They had learned to associate their worth with their ability to please others sexually, leaving them unable to form healthy relationships or understand their own desires and needs. Many of these survivors developed what we would now recognize as complex trauma disorders. They experienced nightmares, flashbacks, and periods of complete emotional numbness that could last for months. They had learned to dissociate from their bodies during abuse, a survival mechanism that often persisted long after their enslavement ended. Some would find themselves unable to remember entire years of their childhood, their minds having blocked out memories too painful to process. The economic structure surrounding these children was vast and sophisticated. Beyond the initial purchase price, wealthy Romans invested enormous sums in their boy concubines' appearance and training. They hired specialists to teach proper deportment, musicians to develop their singing voices, and poets to expand their literary knowledge. Cosmetics, jewelry, and fine clothing represented ongoing expenses that some masters treated as investments in their own social standing. This created a perverse market where the most abused children were often the most valuable. Boys who had successfully learned to hide their trauma, who could perform happiness and desire convincingly, commanded higher prices when sold or traded between masters. The children who adapted best to their circumstances, those who seemed to genuinely enjoy their situation, were celebrated as success stories, held up as examples of how wonderful the system could be when everyone played their assigned roles. But behind those practiced smiles and rehearsed performances, these boys were dying inside. Letters and diary entries from the period, written by adults who had escaped this system, described the constant internal battle between the persona they had been forced to create and the terrified child that still existed somewhere deep inside them. They wrote about feeling like actors trapped in a play that never ended, forced to perform a character that grew more real each day until they could no longer remember who they had been before. The trading of these boys between wealthy Romans was conducted with the same casual efficiency as any other business transaction. Masters would grow bored with their current concubines and seek newer, younger replacements. They would attend private auctions held in luxurious villas where boys would be displayed and examined like merchandise. The children being sold often had no idea their ownership was changing hands until they were informed by servants to pack their few possessions. These transitions were particularly traumatic because they destroyed whatever fragile stability the boys had managed to create. Just when they had learned one master's preferences and developed strategies for survival in one household, they would be thrust into completely new circumstances with different rules, different expectations, and different forms of abuse. Each transition required rebuilding their entire identity around a new set of demands. Some masters would loan their boy concubines to friends for special occasions, dinner parties, religious festivals, or private celebrations. The children had no say in these arrangements and often learned about them only when servants arrived to escort them to unfamiliar locations. They would spend days or weeks in strange houses, forced to adapt quickly to new masters' preferences, while knowing their situation was temporary and uncertain. The religious aspects of Roman society offered no sanctuary for these suffering children. Roman gods were seen as approving of these arrangements, and religious festivals often included ceremonies where boy concubines played central roles. They would be dressed as mythological figures and required to participate in rituals that celebrated their subjugation as divinely ordained. Even the spaces that should have provided spiritual comfort became venues for their exploitation. The few records we have of boys attempting to escape reveal the hopelessness of their situation. Roman society was organized to prevent slave escapes, with severe punishments for anyone who aided runaways. The boys had no money, no knowledge of the world outside their master's household, and no skills that would allow them to survive independently. Most who attempted escape were captured within days and returned to face punishments that served as examples to others who might consider similar attempts. Perhaps most heartbreaking were the letters these boys would write to families they could barely remember, messages that were intercepted by their masters and never sent. These documents, discovered in archaeological excavations, reveal children desperately trying to maintain connections to their origins while being systematically erased by the people who controlled them. They wrote about dreams of returning home, about memories of parents whose faces were growing dim, about languages they were forgetting because they were forbidden to speak them. The medical care these boys received was designed primarily to maintain their usefulness to their masters, rather than ensure their well-being. Roman physicians developed specialized knowledge about treating injuries that might affect a boy's appearance or performance capabilities, but they showed little concern for the psychological damage being inflicted. They prescribed remedies for physical ailments while ignoring the obvious signs of severe emotional distress. As these children aged and began showing signs of physical maturity, their value in the concubine market decreased rapidly. Masters who had invested years in their training would suddenly lose interest as the boys developed adult characteristics that no longer matched Roman preferences for youthful beauty. This transition period was often the most dangerous time in their lives as they faced uncertain futures with masters who no longer found them useful. These stories from ancient Rome force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about human nature, that when power goes unchecked and society normalizes the unthinkable, even the most civilized cultures can become engines of systematic cruelty. The boys we've discussed today weren't just victims of individual monsters, they were casualties of an entire civilization that decided their suffering was acceptable, even admirable. What happened in those marble halls 2,000 years ago didn't stay buried with the Roman Empire. Throughout history, whenever societies have decided that certain groups of people matter less than others, we see these same patterns emerge: the dehumanization, the systematic abuse, the cultural blindness that allows horror to flourish in plain sight. The faces change, the methods evolve, but the underlying dynamics remain disturbingly familiar. These forgotten children deserve more than our pity. They deserve our commitment to recognizing the warning signs when power begins to corrupt, when wealth starts to matter more than humanity, when society begins to normalize what should never be acceptable. Their stories remind us that progress isn't inevitable, that the thin line between civilization and barbarism requires constant vigilance to maintain. Thank you for bearing witness to these difficult truths alongside me. If this exploration of history's darkest chapters has opened your eyes to patterns that still echo in our world today, please share this video and continue these important conversations. The best way we can honor these forgotten victims is by ensuring their suffering teaches us to build a better world.